Well, government meteorologists have found that Hurricane Michael was actually a catastrophic Category 5 when it made landfall.
But what's the reasoning behind this? Meteorologist Chris Franklin takes a behind-the-scenes look at the science.
October 10th, 2018 will go down in history as powerful Hurricane Michael made landfall near Mexico Beach, Florida. But today, history was changed when NOAA determined that Michael was a Category 5 as it crossed the coast. As the only local television station on the ground, my photographer and I were the few eyewitnesses to roofs being ripped apart, arriving moments after this church collapsed and making certain no one was injured when coming to a flipped truck. But what prompted NOAA to upgrade the strength of Michael? Well, one of those things is data. Data that had not been available in real time was scoured through post-storm and determined that surface winds likely reached 160 miles an hour, making Michael a low-end Category 5. Hurricane and surface winds, surface pressures, satellite and radar data were all examined, and the determination to upgrade Michael's winds was made. However, these winds were likely over a very small area, basically within the eye wall, which is from Tyndall Air Force Base to Mexico Beach. This places Michael in the annals of hurricane history, making it only one of 4 Category 5 hurricanes to make landfall in the United States, the others being the Labor Day storm, Camille, and Andrew. So what does this status change mean? Absolutely nothing. It is just a point of interest for historians and research purposes. It certainly means nothing to the people of the Florida Panhandle trying to rebuild their lives.